sometimes, the most useful ideas aren't the newest ones.
Right.
They're often these classic concepts, maybe from way back, that actually give us surprising insights for today.
Especially when things feel like they're changing so fast. Looking back can be grounding.
Exactly. And I think that's really true in education, particularly when we talk about shaping character in young kids.
It definitely feels relevant in a world pushing for constant innovation. These foundational theories, they still offer a lot.
Absolutely. So that's what we're digging into today. We're doing a deep dive into behaviorism.
A classic.
Yeah. And you might think, okay, behaviorism, got it. But we want to look at how it's actually being used now in modern schools, specifically for character building.
And we've got a great guide for this, an article that just came out, March 2025. It looks at exactly this, using specific elementary school in Medan, Indonesia, as a case study.
Okay, so that's our mission. We're going to unpack this source and get into the core ideas of behaviorism, see how this school is putting it into practice.
See what's working, what the challenges are.
Right, the upsides, the downsides.
Right.
And really try to figure out what it all means for you, whether you're an educator, a parent, or just interested in learning.
Okay, so behaviorism. Where do we start? What's the absolute bedrock principle?
Well, the core idea, like the fundamental thing laid out in this article, it's that learning is basically a change in observable behavior.
Something you can actually see and measure.
Exactly. And that change comes from the interaction between a stimulus, something in the environment, and a response, how someone acts.
So the focus is really external, isn't it? It's about what happens to you, shaping your actions through things like reinforcement.
Rewards and punishments, yeah. That's the driver they point to.
Which makes that measurement piece so critical for them.
Totally. If you can't see a measurable change in behavior, then, well, from a strict behaviorist standpoint, learning hasn't really happened. It's very concrete.
Yeah. And the article mentions this is often why it gets linked to early childhood or elementary ed. Focusing on those clear, observable actions and the teacher actively guiding things.
Right. It gives the teacher a very defined role in shaping behavior.
Okay, but behaviorism isn't just one monolithic thing, is it? The source mentions different strands.
No, exactly. It touches on a few key foundational ideas. How do they fit together?
Well, there are different takes on how those stimulus-response connections get formed or strengthened. First, the article mentions connectionism. That's Thorndike.
Thorndike, trial and error, right?
Pretty much. Learning happens through trying things out.
Yeah.
Successful attempts strengthen the link, the SR bond, they call it, between the situation and the action. Repetition makes it stronger.
Like learning to ride a bike. Lots of falling, then you get it, and practice locks it in.
Sort of, yeah. The article uses early language learning, kids babbling, trying words, getting positive feedback for the right sounds, strengthening those connections.
Okay, then there's classical conditioning, Pavlov's dog's territory.
Right. This is about associating stimuli. You pair something neutral with something that naturally causes a reaction.
Like the bell on the food.
Exactly. And eventually, the bell alone makes the dog salivate. So it's about manipulating the environment to create associations and build habits through repetition.
Got it. And Guthrie, contiguous conditioning. That sounds a bit different.
Yeah, Guthrie's idea was simpler in a way. If you do a specific action when a specific stimulus is present, they become linked. Just happening together is key.
Okay.
The article briefly mentions his ideas for breaking habits, like the threshold method, introducing the trigger very weakly, or fatigue overdoing the trigger, or opposite reaction doing something incompatible, all about managing the conditions around the behavior.
Interesting. And then the big one, maybe the one most people think of in schools, operant conditioning, Skinner.
Yes, B.F. Skinner. Here, the key is what happens after the behavior, the consequence.
So it's not just the stimulus triggering it, like Pavlov.
No, it's about whether the response is followed by something that strengthens it reinforcement. A reward makes you more likely to do it again. A punishment makes you less likely.
Which puts a lot of emphasis on the teacher figuring out those consequences, right, to guide students.
Absolutely. Setting up the environment so desired behaviors are reinforced.
And that leads directly to the practical strategies schools use, like positive reinforcement, giving something good, like praise or points. Negative reinforcement, taking away something bad, like maybe stopping a reminder once a task is done.
Right, removing the unpleasant thing.
And punishment, which is an unpleasant consequence for unwanted behavior. The article even mentions the classic token economy.
Ah, yes. Earning points or tokens for good behavior, then cashing them in. You still see that around.
Definitely. So these are old ideas. How does the article argue they're still relevant, especially now with all this tech?
Well, it makes a really interesting point. It suggests technology hasn't made behaviorism obsolete. In some ways, it's actually supercharged its principles. Think about educational apps, online learning platforms, even brain training games. What's often at their core?
Repetition, practice exercises, getting points.
Exactly. Repetition, immediate feedback, rewards like points or badges, moving up levels. That's all rooted in behaviorist ideas of practice, reinforcement, shaping behavior through consequences.
So the tech is almost built on these principles.
In many cases, yes. The mechanics rely on repeated actions, feedback loops, classic Thorndike and Skinner, really, and that behaviorist focus on measurable outcomes.
Still very relevant, I bet, especially with data analytics in education.
Absolutely. If you can track clicks, correct answers, time on task, you have observable, measurable data showing behavior change.
Okay, this makes sense. Let's get concrete then. Let's look at the case study. Al-Azhar Elementary in Medan. What's their whole approach? What are they trying to achieve?
So this school, SD Swasta Al-Azhar, has this really interesting vision. They call it producing intellectual Muslim and Muslim intellectual.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means they're trying to blend religious piety and faith with modern science and tech. And a huge part of that is explicitly cultivating what they call akhlaqul karima, noble character. Discipline and cleanliness are big too.
So character isn't an afterthought, it's central.
Very central. And the article shows how they use behaviorist techniques in everyday activities to build that character.
Like what? What are some examples?
Okay, one is the routine of praying before and after every lesson.
A regular habit.
Exactly. They see the start and end of class as the stimulus. The prayer is the desired response, meant to create focus, readiness, a positive attitude. It's like classical conditioning. The routine builds the association, the habit.
And they mentioned students leading the closing prayer.
Yeah, which adds a layer of responsibility, reinforces the importance of the act. Positive engagement.
What else?
Another daily routine is memorizing verses from the Quran. They call it muraja.
How does behaviorism fit there?
Well, it's pure repetition to strengthen memory. That's Thorndike's connectionism right there. Practice, practice, practice.
Is there a goal, a reward?
Yep. There's a clear target, memorize all of JUZ 30 by the time they finish 5th grade. And if they hit that target, they get a specific reward, a certificate from the school's foundation.
And if they don't?
The article says they can still pass the grade, but they miss out on that formal recognition. So it acts as a consequence, framed within that reward structure, aiming to boost motivation. Plus, the daily grind of memorizing builds discipline itself.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, they also use problem-based learning, PBL. That sounds different, more student-centered, maybe constructivist.
It is, on the surface. The article mentions activities like students working together to create a food web artifact. That's very hands-on, discovery-based learning.
Right, so where's the behaviorism?
It comes in, according to the source, particularly in the assessment. How do you know the students learned from the PBL activity?
You look at what they produced, the artifact, how well they explain it.
Exactly. You look for observable, measurable outcomes. Can they demonstrate the understanding in a concrete way? That focus on demonstrable behavior change aligns with behaviorism. Plus, things like enthusiasm during the project or praise from the teacher or peers, that acts as positive reinforcement too.
Okay, so it's layered in even within a more student-led approach. And they use tech too, interactive games.
Yes, they use apps like WordWall for subjects like Bahasa Indonesia. And this is where you really see the behaviorist principles in modern tools.
How so?
The games often require repetition to succeed, right? Answering questions, practicing skills over and over to beat a level or get a high score. That repetition, combined with immediate feedback correct points earned, builds skills and habits. Very Skinner, very Thorndike.
And the teacher's involved.
Yeah, the teacher observes the students playing, sees who's getting it, who's struggling, can step in with help or encouragement. And then, importantly, the students take what they practiced in the game, say vocabulary words, and use them to build sentences or write stories.
So the game builds the foundation through repetition and reinforcement, and then they apply it.
Exactly. It shows how these principles are embedded in the tech they use, facilitated by the classroom's setup laptops, projector, Wi-Fi.
So putting it all together, the prayer routines, the memorization targets and rewards, how they assess PBL, the game mechanics, it really shows these old ideas are still actively used for skill building and shaping character, discipline, piety.
Yeah, the case study makes that quite clear. It's not just theory, it's practice.
But like any approach, it's not perfect. The article looks at strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
What did it find were the main advantages of using these methods?
Okay, on the plus side, a big one is measurability.
Because it's focused on observable behavior.
Exactly. It's relatively straightforward to see if a behavior has changed, so you can evaluate if your teaching method is working. That objectivity is useful.
Makes sense for tracking progress. What else?
They also note it can be really effective for motivating kids, especially younger ones, through that clear system of reinforcement. Praise rewards kids often respond well to knowing what's expected and getting positive feedback.
Okay.
And related to that, the source suggests that focusing on positive reinforcement can help create a more pleasant learning atmosphere, less punitive, more encouraging.
But there have to be downsides too. What weaknesses did the article point out?
Yeah, definitely. A major criticism highlighted is that behaviorism can be quite mechanistic.
Mechanistic, meaning
Meaning it focuses so much on the external stimulus and response, it doesn't really delve into the internal mental processes. Things like critical thinking, creativity, complex problem solving, they don't fit neatly into that SR model.
so it might be good at teaching facts or specific behaviors, but maybe not so good at teaching how to think independently.
That's the concern, yes.
Yeah.
And the other big weakness mentioned is the potential long-term impact of relying heavily on external motivation.
Ah, the rewards and punishments potentially undermining intrinsic motivation.
Exactly. If kids only do things to get a sticker or avoid losing privileges, do they ever develop a genuine love of learning or a sense of responsibility for its own sake? That's a real worry.
That's a huge tension in education, isn't it? Using motivators effectively without killing internal drive.
It really is. And the article doesn't shy away from the practical challenges teachers at Al-Azhar face trying to implement this stuff day to day.
What kind of hurdles did they mention?
Well, resources are one. Things like interactive learning apps can be expensive, especially if you need a variety.
Sure, budgets are always tight.
And even if you have the tech, teachers need support. The article stresses the need for ongoing training, especially in creating good tech-based materials themselves. It's not always intuitive.
Right, just having the tool isn't enough. You need to know how to use it well.
And then there's the challenge of student diversity. The school identified students with different learning styles, audiovisual, kinesthetic, logical, mathematical, trying to create behaviorist-style activities, maybe based on repetition, that work equally well for everyone. That's tough.
Yeah, one size rarely fits all. And just keeping track of what everyone's doing.
That too. Monitoring all student activity, especially if they're using individual tech or working on different things, is a real practical challenge for teachers.
Okay, so lots of real-world friction. Does the article offer any solutions or ways forward they're exploring?
It does. One suggestion is continued curriculum innovation, trying to incorporate more interactive methods, like the PBL they're already using, or other project-based approaches. These can help with engagement, maybe address some of the critical thinking gaps.
So blending approaches.
Exactly. And for the monitoring problem, one solution mentioned is using technology itself, like CCTV in the classroom.
CCTV, wow. That sounds intense.
It does, but the rationale is it allows teachers a way to observe activity more broadly, maybe even review things later to see what happened.
Okay. Any other solutions?
Yes, and this one seems really key. Encouraging teachers to be active in professional communities, like their teacher working groups, KKG, or internal school groups.
Why is that important?
Because it creates a space for them to share what's working, what's not, tackle these challenges together, and collaboratively develop better materials and programs, peer support, and shared learning.
That makes a lot of sense. Building collective capacity. Okay, so let's try to synthesize all this. We've gone through the basics, the different strands, the modern tech angle, the case study, the pros and cons, the challenges. What's the big picture here? What should we take away?
I think the main takeaway from the source is that behaviorism, even though it's an older theory, is definitely not dead. It's still very relevant, especially for specific things.
Like what specifically?
Like building foundational skills that rely on practice and repetition, instilling discipline, shaping particular observable behaviors, which includes aspects of character they were focused on at Al-Azhar. The structure of reinforcement really works for that.
And we saw its influence in the design of a lot of educational tech, too.
Hugely. Repetition, feedback loops, rewards, that's often the engine driving those tools. But And this is crucial. The article makes it really clear that relying only on behaviorism is limiting. It doesn't inherently foster that deeper critical thinking or intrinsic motivation.
So it's not an either situation, it's about balance.
Precisely. The real insight seems to be about smart integration. Use behaviorist tools where they excel establishing habits, reinforcing specific actions, practicing basic skills, but combine them with other approaches, maybe more constructivist or cognitive ones, to develop those higher order thinking skills and that internal drive.
It's about having a full toolbox and knowing when to use which tool.
You got it. A dynamic approach for comprehensive development.
So we've covered a lot of ground, from Pavlov and Skinner to core memorization apps and PBL assessment in Medan. We've seen how these classical ideas are being applied, their strengths, their weaknesses, and the real-world balancing act teachers face.
It really shows how looking back at foundational theories can give us practical tools for today's educational goals.
It really does. So as you're thinking about all this, here's something to chew on. There's this constant push and pull, isn't there, between using external things like rewards and clear consequences to shape behavior which can be effective in nurturing a child's own internal desire to learn, their curiosity, their intrinsic motivation. How do you think we educators, parents, anyone involved with kids can best strike that balance in today's world?